Friend! O vídeo de hoje é super especial. Nós vamos ter a honra de receber o professor Will van der Ausch, um dos maiores nomes do BPM no mundo. Este holandês simplesmente apenas cunhou a área de mineração de processos. Em 2011, junto com outros membros da I3E Task Force, ele publicou o Process Mining Manifesto. Mas, na verdade, ele já vinha uma década estudando, pesquisando e publicando na área de mineração de processos. Eu tive a honra de conhecer o professor Will van der Ausch em 2016, quando a BPM Conference aconteceu aqui no Rio de Janeiro. Vou deixar uma foto desse encontro para você conferir. E agora, em 2024, quando eu participei da BPM Conference na Cracóvia, na Polônia, eu o encontrei novamente. Vou deixar uma foto mais atual aqui para você ver. Papo vai, papo vem. Eu convidei-o para participar aqui do nosso canal de BPM, o maior canal de BPM do Brasil, e ele prontamente aceitou o convite. Então, sem mais delongas, BPM Friend, agora você vai ter a chance de acompanhar esse papo incrível com ele, que também é Chief Scientist da Celonis, uma ferramenta de mineração de processos. Desde já eu agradeço aí pelo tempo, pela atenção do professor van der Ausch. BPM Friend, com vocês no palco, professor Will van der Ausch. BPM friends, welcome to DECA YouTube channel, the biggest BPM channel in Brazil. My name is Andrea Magalhães and I am the host. And today I will be honored to receive Professor Will van der Ausch, the godfather of process mining. Hi, Professor van der Ausch. I'd like to thank you very much for accepting the invitation to participate in this video. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I believe that is a unique opportunity for us here in Brazil to learn a little bit more about your experience in the process mining field. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I love the work that you're doing to promote BPM and process mining in the Brazilian community. I think that's great, and I'm happy to play my role in this.
Thank you very much. Will, it's a challenge mission to introduce a man with such a background, so I will not even try, and I will let you share the details about your career, your experience with us. Go ahead, the stage is yours.
Yeah, so like if you go a bit in the history, right? As you just mentioned, I'm called the godfather of process mining these days. But my history actually started much more in, let's say, classical process modeling, also very much the formal things. And what's perhaps interesting is that, like when I was a student in Eindhoven, like that was just the beginning of computer science in Eindhoven, and I still had lectures from Edsger Dijkstra, who was a very famous professor. And like I first studied computer science, and then I did a PhD more in mathematics area. And then I was very much involved with PetriNet, right? That was like the big thing at the time that we were working on. And then gradually I moved into first in applications related to logistics, later applications related to workflow management. And then like I got kind of disappointed in the effectiveness of workflow management technology. And I also was a bit disappointed in like the value of making process models without connecting it to reality, that I started to work on let's say, process mining in the late 90s, right? That was, like I could see that this is going to become something very important, although I'm surprised that it's still taking such a long time for people to actually see the value.
Well, okay, so I know that you are very critical about what you call the traditional BPM. And it was one of the motivations for you invest in process mining, right? And nowadays you can look back and see that it was a nice vision that you have many, many years ago. Can you discuss a little bit more about it?
Yeah, like my background was very much in let's say process modeling, making simulation models, right? And I love doing that. I was also involved, let's say, in some industry projects, and what I would see is that companies would spend a lot of money on, let's say, simply modeling the processes. And what I saw was that often the discussions were useful, but the models at the end not so much, right? Because they would go into a drawer, etc., etc. And then, like when workflow management systems, let's say, came into existence, so in the mid 90s, workflow management was a big hype. There were many vendors offering, let's say, workflow management software. I completely believed in it, right? I really believed this vision. Okay, let's just model the processes as they should happen. Then we push a button, and then you suddenly have a system that makes sure that everything works correctly. And I was a strong believer in that, right? I really, so I was also involved in some practical projects. But what we then saw was that many companies would buy the technology, but in the end not use it, right? And the reason why they were buying the technology is that they wanted to have process support, but at the same time, when they were, let's say, modeling it, they were very naive, right? They left out all the difficult cases. And if they then tried to implement a workflow management system, that meant that all the difficult cases had to be done by hand, right? So that was not, let's say, the best solution. So that's why I then changed my strategy to not start from modeling, but start from the actual data. So that shift was, let's say, around the turn of the century. At the end of the 90s, I started to think about this. And then gradually, like all of my research and everything moved into, let's say, process mining, because it is a technology that is much easier to use than something like a workflow management system, right? Because it always works, right? If you have the data, you extract the data, you see the actual processes, and you immediately get ideas on how you can improve things.
Will, when you say that you need to have the data, it comes to my mind a question. Is it possible to use process mining in a company with manual process? Or does the company need to automate its process and organize its data before trying to use process mining?
They definitely don't need to automate it before, right? So automation is definitely not necessary to do process mining. I think automation often comes at the very end, right? If you have everything under control, you know what you want to have, everything is well organized. I think automation is something that comes at the very end. Process mining comes much more at the beginning. But what is, of course, necessary is that like somehow your data is stored in information systems, right? So if companies are using like an ERP system, like Oracle, SAP, or something like Salesforce or ServiceNow or something like that, it is clear that organizations that have such systems have data, right? They may not always use it, but they have the data, and you can do process mining. If you are dealing with an organization where you still have everything on paper, right? Everything is on paper. People are doing it with pen and paper. Then I think before you do process mining, you should really first kind of do a digital transformation where you try to make sure that the data is electronic. I think that's a first step. But that's a first step for anything, right? Many organizations love to talk about generative AI and all kinds of things, but they want to jump over this step. And I think that is like asking the impossible. You need to get rid of paper, right? Things need to be digital, and only then you can start improving it. And very much later, you can think about how you can automate it, but that's not the starting point.
And so, how a company here in Brazil who can be interested in process mining, how do you start with process mining? What are the basic steps that you need before starting a project with process mining?
So if I try to reverse it a bit, like process mining is a technology that works, right? There is no doubt about it. There are many software tools available. They work, they do their job. I think where the biggest hurdles are in data and people, right? I think the data part is organizations that do not have their data management under control. It is very difficult to do anything related to process improvement or whatsoever, right? So data is one factor that is very important to get it under control. The other hurdle is not that process mining is very difficult to use, but you need to somehow, the insights of process mining, you need to turn that into organizational change. And the point is that if you do process mining, if everything is great and everything is perfect, you don't need to do it, right? So you do process mining because you think that you can improve. You think that your processes can be better. And this is often a painful reality where people need to change habits and they need to do things differently, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, if I start negatively, inhibitors are, let's say, having the data and the willingness to actually improve, right? I think these are, let's say, two very important preconditions. If these preconditions are satisfied, it is relatively easy, right? So you start. And so I would always recommend organizations to start with relatively standard processes like purchase to pay, order to cash, accounts payable, accounts receivable, these types of things, for the simple reason that there is a lot of experience in applying process mining to these types of processes, right? You kind of can predict what you can save and what you can find. So one would start there, but one should definitely not stop there. So for example, I don't know, like most of the car manufacturers are customers of Celonis. And if you look at the car manufacturing like Porsche or BMW or Ford or whatever, their goal is to build cars. Their goal is not to do purchase to pay or order to cash. So what I find super exciting is that in such organizations, you apply process mining not to the, let's say, financial processes and the sales processes and procurement, but you also actually apply it to production because that is where the biggest benefits are. But you typically do that once you have the first experiences, right? I would not recommend organizations with, let's say, processes which are very uniquely for them. First, get experience with the technology, apply it, it works. Make sure that there is the willingness in the organization to actually implement changes, because otherwise nothing will work. And then you can gradually go from one process to the next.
Perfect. So you have a roadmap. You can start with simple process, and then when you have the control of the technology, when you really understand the potential, you can go ahead with another kind of process. Okay, perfect.
And I think like a mistake that some organizations, I think, make is that like process mining starts very much bottom up, right? So there is one data scientist or like a BPM person that is super enthusiastic. There needs to be support from higher level management because you want to improve, and to improve you need to change things. So it has to be a bit top down, right? Where you can actually, let's say, address these things. And I think that that's very important to get started and not immediately think about the business case, right? So with process mining, you can definitely save lots and lots of money, but you should first create a spirit. Okay, we want to have good working processes, right? That these savings will come later, right? But what I also often say is that you get the best return on investment if you do process mining, if you are able to scale, right? If you buy software and you apply it to one process, that's really a pity, right? You need to scale, and that's very important, I think.
It makes no sense to buy a solution of process mining to use in one or two processes. You need to, for sure.
Yeah, and especially if you apply to one or two processes and then you ask, what is the return on investment? I needed to train people, I needed to buy the software. Of course, that will not work, but you should think of it, okay, this is now a better way to run your organization. You need to invest some let's say, you need to invest money in training, in software, et cetera. But once you have done that, it's like a technology that you can apply in all kinds of domains.
And Will, do you believe, in your experience, that it's possible to maintain a process mining implementation without a business process center of excellence? Or do you need a team taking care of this process mining solution and this process after the implementation?
Yeah, so I think it depends very much on the size of the company that you have, right? So what I said, I think it's very important that you should try to scale so that you build experience and then apply it in procurement, apply it in production or sales or whatever process you have. So I think that's very important. And if you have a center of excellence, and also studies show that if you have a process mining center of excellence, you get the benefits from it, right? Because you can apply this experience, let's say, in many different processes. And I think there are many, let's say, very nice examples of larger organizations that have such centers that applied it in multiple domains. If you're a larger organization, I definitely think that makes sense. But it's also like if you're a smaller organization, like you do not need to start with all of that. But I think is also important is that I think a situation that one should avoid is that an organization has a BPM center of excellence, a process mining center of excellence, a Six Sigma center of excellence, etc., all next to each other and competing with each other. Like all of these things belong together, right? And I think that only makes sense. What I see, I'm not sure in Brazil, but what I see in some companies, let's say here in Europe and in the US, where there are very, let's say, strong Six Sigma groups that at the same time feel it as competition, right? And I think that's the wrong attitude because process mining is a perfect tool for people with the Six Sigma background, but they have to be willing to also approach certain things in a more analytical way.
Here in Brazil, companies used to have a business process management center of excellence. But sometimes there is a discussion. Oh, how about the BPM technology, RPA, process mining, process simulation? Are these technologies going to be with the IT people, with the IT department? Or should the BPM Center of Excellence also take care of these technologies? And sometimes it's a huge discussion, and there are the three types of companies here in Brazil. We have the ones that choose to let it all with the Business Process Management Center of Excellence. We have companies that choose to have the IT taking care of all the technologies and the business process people are not involved. And we have the combination of these two models, the hybrid models. So do you believe that the process mining technology is a business for the IT people, for IT department?
Yeah, so how you do that in the organization, I think there are different models that could work, right? And like you could also reverse it, right? So I think if you look at classical BPM, with many people, let's say, working with pen and paper, making BPMN diagrams and IT, I think there is a big divide. Right. So you could say that there are three camps, right? There are the people that are actually working in the process and actually managing the processes. There are the people that love to draw business models, and there are the people that do the IT part, right? And I think process mining is a wonderful technology that it can bring these three groups of people together. Why? Because for people actually working in the process, it is nice that there is now this technology which is actually connected to reality, right? At any point in time, right? So they can see that. For the people that like to talk about processes and look at processes, like they can do this process-oriented approach. And for IT, it's also no longer completely disconnected, right? So I think it's a type of technology that brings these three groups of people together, which is very powerful. At the same time, it creates the question where exactly the things are, right? And I think it depends very much on the organization. I think it always requires collaboration. But just think about the question of finding data, right? That is relevant to improve the process. it is very clear that you need to have, let's say, domain experts that actually can answer questions. Okay, what can be problems and what may be things that one can look at, but they are typically unable to say, okay, you need to look at this SAP table or something like that. For that, you need to have the IT people, right? And I think it's very important to connect these groups. And I think in successful companies, this is working properly. I don't think that the process mining department will kind of take over the IT department or take over the business unit. I think it's like an integrated service, right? That is helping also to connect the different parts. It's also like if you look at process mining technology, like running the process mining software itself is not the difficult part, right? It's typically running in the cloud. There's not much that you don't need hardware, etc., etc. It's always, as I said earlier, the data part and the people part that is difficult. Yeah.
Will, I know that nowadays you are not only a professor, right? You are also a chief scientist at Celonis too, right? Can you tell us a little bit about it? How is the experience of being in the academia and in the industry at the same time?
Yes, of course, my goal was always to turn like ideas that we developed in research into practice, right? And like Celonis is not the only company. There are several, let's say, process mining vendors available. Also, several of these companies are by, let's say, some of my students. So I like there was a phase where one could say, okay, open source solutions were kind of state of the art. If I look at it today from a research point of view, like the newest innovations are still in open source tools, like for example, PROM and PM4Py and all the things that we work on. But at the same time, for certain research questions, you need to apply process mining really in an industrial setting, right? So I think what's a very interesting question, for example, I'm now focusing very much on object-centric process mining. That means that you no longer look at, I don't know, a data set and that's it. No, you need to look at the context, right? So you need to look at orders, products, customers, billing, and all of these things together. So that's very important. So I'm super happy that I have the possibility to, on the one hand, let's say, do research and help to accelerate getting these ideas into software products. At the same time, like through Celonis, I get lots of experience on, let's say, what people are actually doing with the technology and the type of hurdles that I see. And what I think is very fascinating, and so I just mentioned object-centric process mining. If you look at the time between, let's say, research results being developed and actually being implemented in a commercial system where it is applied in thousands of organizations, it's kind of fascinating how fast this innovation cycle is going compared to, let's say, 10, 20 years ago.
And Will, can you tell us a little bit about Celonis' history? Because I know it started at the university, right?
So it's a bit more complicated. So, like as I said earlier, several of my students that actually studied in Eindhoven, let's say, started process mining companies. If you look at Celonis, if you look at the three founders, so Alex, Basti, and Martin, they were studying at the Technical University of Munich, and they had to do like a project. And in this project, they remembered that they had been seeing, let's say, my papers and the software tools that we had at the time. And then when they had to do the project, they were thinking about it, and they thought, okay, let's try to apply these types of things. So they very much started by, let's say, applying the ideas. And then they immediately saw, okay, this has lots of potential. At the same time, the usability of, let's say, academic prototypes is not super good. So they kind of took these ideas, and I think what they did kind of different, let's say, from let's say, companies that started earlier in this space. Like in the beginning, they were thinking about the business user, right? That actually people in the processes, working in the processes, would consume, let's say, process mining results. If you look at many of the companies before, and there are still some companies in that space, they really view, let's say, process mining as a tool for a data scientist. And I think if you view process mining as a tool that only a data scientist looks at, you run a bit into the risk of, let's say, classical BPM, right? That it's like it ends up in a drawer, it doesn't have lots of exposure. So I think if you look at organizations that apply Celonis successfully, they are very successful because the system is used by many people that actually look at how the processes are going, that look at the problems, and then can address this. And so I think this was something that they did very different. If you look at the software today, I think estimates. I think Gartner estimates it's like 60% of the market. Some other people estimate it's 70% of the market. So it's clearly like the biggest, let's say, process mining vendor that is around. And I think we also have like a very complete solution, right? So if you look at it is about data extraction, making that easy for different types of systems. Then there are, let's say, process discovery, but not just discovering a directly follows graph, but also discovering, let's say, object-centric models and object-centric BPMN models. This is all there. Also, if you go to conformance checking, like you can make a BPMN model and you can check like where your processes deviate from, up to the level of, let's say, using, let's say, predictive analytics, let's say, classical AI and machine learning, up to generative AI, right? So it's kind of the whole platform layer.
So it's a complete solution for process mining, and you have all of the functions there.
It's also a bit like the vision that we have is like that process mining is transitioning from a tool for a specialist, right? The specialist is using the tool, analyzing the data and creating a report, and it is transitioning to, let's say, that the process mining is like a layer on top of existing systems, right? If you look at large organizations, they do not have one system. Sometimes they have hundreds of different systems. And if you look at the processes, like they run through all of these different systems. And I think process mining is becoming more a platform technology, where it's the layer on top of all of these existing systems, not replacing them, but making sure that this overall process is running correctly and that you can immediately, if you see certain problems, that you can react to it, right? And I think this requires a completely different mindset than, let's say, the mindset that we had 20 years ago, like, let's try to discover a process, right? It's completely different.
Will, and now, after that, how do you see the future of BPM? Because you have hundreds of papers, you have many books, and now with Celonis, you almost have a complete solution for process mining. So how do you see the future now? Are you finally going to retire and all the work is already done? Or what challenge do we have in the front of us?
Yeah, so I think like if I look on the academic side, what you can see is that many of the, let's say, traditional problems that we worked on are still the problems that we are working on today. It's the same as asking, I don't know, like a professor in a hospital that is working on cancer research, and you asking what is the new thing that you do? Yeah, we try to treat cancer, and we do that better like every year. So I think many of the, let's say, innovations that one is seeing, better discovery, better conformance checking, better prediction, and all of these things, they end up with some delay in commercial systems, and there is still a lot of improvement possible, right? So from a research point of view, you could say it's business as usual, right? That we continue to work on things. And of course, things like the connection between process mining and AI now seems like a hot topic. But if you look at the first papers that we wrote on, for example, predicting remaining processing time, etc., all of these questions like were already asked 15, 20 years ago, where there were, let's say, first algorithms. And of course, the algorithms today are much better, right? So I think that is, from a research point of view, there is this continuous innovation, not so much looking at new problems. So perhaps we call things differently, but we still work on hard problems that get better each year. if I look at, let's say, more at the market, I think, so if you look at what is the future of business process management, I think there is no future of business process management without process mining, right? I think it is no longer believable that you're working on process improvement without actually using data, right? So I think that is like a key thing. And so like that is there to stay. If I look at applications, like my prediction is that things will scale in two directions. So it will scale in the direction where more organizations are using it, right? That I think in Brazil there is still lots of potential of organizations do not even know that it exists, but there is a huge potential to apply it. But also what I see in the companies that are already using it, they can also scale in getting in more processes, right? So it's more organizations and in the organizations deeper. Of course, it is now typically a technology that is used by larger organizations. I think over time, but this will again be a gradual process, that it will be more cost effective and more beneficial also for smaller companies, right? I think these are things that we will see. Perhaps like a factor that, and I'm not sure how that plays in Brazil, but what I see in Europe, and for example, just recently I was also in Japan and Korea. Process mining is also like a growing topic. So one of the things that we see in these countries, in Europe, but also in Korea, in Japan, is that the birth rate is very low, right? So there is it's very clear that there will be a shortage of people working in governments, municipalities, etc., etc. So there is a huge potential that we need to do, let's say, lots of administrative work much more efficient. And I think there will be increasingly pressure on governments, on cities, on, I don't know, all kinds of companies to be more efficient, because there will be fewer people. On the one hand, still the physical work needs to be done, right? So I think there is there will be increasingly pressure just because there will be fewer people. So I'm not sure about the birth rate in Brazil, whether there are similar issues, but here in Germany, like if there would not be immigration, it would go down very quickly, right? The number of people, and there are big concerns that we will have like an aging population. That's complete. Where we now see that there is lots of shortage in various areas, and I think process mining is a key technology that can help there.
Will, you mentioned the challenges with data and people, and now that we are talking about people, I'd like to ask you if you believe that process mining leaves people aside. I mean, with process mining, do we no longer need people such as process managers or experts? They are not necessary anymore because we have all the data and the technology, and that's all?
I don't think so, but jobs will change, right? I think many jobs will become more analytical. If you think about things like machine learning, right? That's a technology that is kind of maturing, and that's a technology that works, right? I think the number of people that one needs in the end to develop these types of technologies is relatively limited. But what you need is people that are able to apply these types of technologies. So that means that you're kind of translating data and problems into a form in such a way that you can apply these types of things. And so I really like the term hybrid intelligence, right? That I feel that like boundaries are shifting between what people are doing and what machines are doing. Like there is a continuous shift. What we now see with, let's say, generative AI is that many jobs for which we thought that they were very important and would not be automated, jobs that are very much, let's say, text-oriented, right? Now suddenly we see, we need much fewer of these people, right? So if you are a consultant and your main job is to generate, let's say, paper, there is a high risk. But if you're a consultant and you're able to apply this technology successful by listening to people and then, let's say, translating their questions and their situation into, let's say, machine learning and process mining problems, I think that is a skill that is very valuable. And what I'm trying to say is that there will be new jobs. The way that people do their jobs will change. I think there will be an end. So like if I look at consultancy, right? Classical consultancy firms, they simply count how many hours does somebody work. And for every hour they bill, I don't know, a couple of €100, and that's the business model. I think that business model is not sustainable if the output is, let's say, a piece of paper, right? It has to be actual solutions that actually, let's say, work. And I think, that's what people need to think about when they also think about what they study, etc., that they make sure that they are able to make this translation. And so the jobs are not in purely domain knowledge. I think the jobs are also not purely in developing, let's say, machine learning algorithms, right? Because at some point in time there is enough. The jobs are really in the translation between these two worlds.
Will, a final question. If you were a beginner nowadays, how would you start studying process mining? Because we have a lot of papers, a lot of books, a lot of materials. Someone that wants to make the first steps in this area, do you have a kind of a suggestion, a tip, a book, a video that you recommend?
Yeah, so there are several courses that we developed. So there is like a classical Coursera course that is based on the book. There are also more recent edX courses that's also hosted here at the University in Aachen. Right, they are for free. People can do that, and I think that's a good starting point. And I think the advantage of taking these types of courses, but of course you need to take time for it, is that you get a bit about the theory, but at the same time you also get access to data sets and to software that you can actually apply it. Right? Because I think that's very important. I think if you start working on process mining and you just look at it very theoretically and you don't have the experience, I think it is very difficult. At the same time, I think it's also very important for people to not just, take Celonis, push some buttons, have no clue how it works, but look at what comes out. I think it's very important to do both, right? That you apply it, but at the same time, that you have a basic understanding how this is computed, right? Because otherwise, you will also not be able to trust what comes out of it.
Perfect. Will, once again, I'd like to thank you. I appreciate your kindness, your openness since our first contact. I appreciate your time for this conversation. I know that half an hour is not enough, but even if you have all the day, it wouldn't be either, because any topic that you mention, the ideas are just popping up on my mind. So I will have control of my curiosity and just express my gratitude on behalf of the Brazilian BPM community for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrea. As I said at the beginning, I think it's great that you're organizing this. As we said earlier, like the biggest bottleneck is people not knowing about this. And I really appreciate your help in, let's say, spreading the message, because I think it's very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will.
Uau, BPM Friend, meu Deus, que honra, que emoção poder conversar um pouco mais com o professor Will van der Ausch, poder recebê-lo aqui na nossa comunidade de BPM Friends do Brasil. Agora, eu quero te perguntar, o que você acha da visão dele de que o futuro do BPM está na mineração de processos? Comenta aqui embaixo para mim. E também quero saber se você se sente preparado para embarcar nessa onda da mineração de processos, se você já andou estudando esse assunto, se conhece essas ferramentas ou não, se quer que a gente traga mais conteúdos e vídeos bacanas sobre mineração de processos, coloca aqui embaixo nos comentários para mim. Se quiser mandar algum recadinho para o professor Will van der Ausch, ele vai ficar de olho também aqui nos feedbacks de vocês. Comentem aqui embaixo, façam barulho, vamos mostrar para as personalidades do BPM no mundo o quanto a comunidade de BPM no Brasil é forte, ativa e engajada. Combinado? Não deixa de dar o seu like nesse vídeo, compartilhar com outros BPM Friends. Já se inscreveu no canal? Vai se inscrever, aperta o sininho para ser notificado, porque vai vir mais novidade especial por aí, você sabe que eu gosto, né? Então não perde essa chance. Acompanha a Deca no Instagram, no LinkedIn e fica de olho no nosso DecaCast, que sai toda segunda-feira. Te vejo em breve com mais um super vídeo da área de BPM para você. Até lá!